Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, and welcome to the Uniquely Human podcast. And a very special welcome to my partner, Dave Finch.
Hey, very happy to be here. And Barry, see if you can guess what I'm doing. You hear that?
Yes, I did.
Aha. Well, that's me clinking glasses and offering you a cheers, a toast to successful launch of our podcast. And here we are in our second episode. And just knowing that it's making an impact the way we want it to is really exciting, which is why I offered this toast of celebration. And in fact, there's no champagne in here. It's just one glass has water and the other glass has pickle juice in it.
No champagne? How about a margarita?
More of a concentrated rye kind of guy, but the pickle juice is for keeping my mouth hydrated. But in some ways, I consider this to be our first episode. We'll dive into specific topics, and that's what we've been really excited to do. We'll introduce the first in a recurring segment called the Weekly Reframe. And first, we have a special guest today. She's our very first guest, in fact. She's our Billy Crystal, or our Bill Murray. Her name is Chloe Rothschild, and you've known Chloe for a while now. Tell us a little bit about Chloe.
Yes, Chloe is a wonderfully creative and engaging young woman who I met a number of years ago, right after Uniquely Human was published. And she got in touch with me and she said how much, not only did she enjoy it, but how much she thought it accurately represented her experience as a young autistic woman. And of course, as I've mentioned previously, that kind of feedback rises to the top of what I love to hear, because it says that what we're talking about is accurate, relevant, and meaningful.
Exactly. I think she's awesome. So let's bring her on. Chloe, welcome to Uniquely Human, the podcast. It's so great to have you. I'm kind of curious, Barry, how do you and Chloe know each other?
Well, let me pass that on to Chloe. Chloe, what's the connection that we made?
I met Dr. Barry when Uniquely Human was the 100th autism book that I got in my collection. And then I couldn't believe I got to hear him speak at OCaliCon. And then he signed my book. And then we became friends. And then we ran into each other a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was such a pleasure to meet you finally. I remember you said that you felt that Uniquely Human was a good description of what autism was to you.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite books, and I recommend it to people. It's one of the top ones on my list.
And this was your 100th book about autism?
Wait, hold on. Oh, it's still recording. We're good. Yeah, it was my 100th book.
Oh, wow. That's a big collection.
Now, and that was years ago when Barry and I met. So now I have more than 100.
What did you think when you met Barry and you heard him speaking? Was it exciting?
I thought it was incredible, and it was amazing because so many people and professionals are not yet open, at least when Barry and I met, and they're still not yet quite open to different types of communication when someone can speak. But Barry is very open to that. And so I just felt the connection.
And let me also say that I had the great pleasure of hearing Chloe speak, because Chloe presents quite a bit now at conferences. And I think that's actually one of your passions that you like to talk about. That's AAC and autism. You want to...
Yeah, when there's not COVID and I can go to a conference. Because we were supposed to be together at a conference in the spring.
That's right. Chloe and I were supposed to share a day.
We were going to keynote.
Oh, really?
And I couldn't believe that I got to share a day with Dr. Barry.
That's right.
So are they rescheduling the conference? Because I'll bet there will be more opportunities for you to share the stage with Barry.
I think so.
Okay. Good.
It was going to be for fall, but I don't think that's happening now either.
No, I think it's going to be rescheduled. Yeah. Yeah. Chloe, Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, ask the question.
You know, one of the things that I'm so impressed by when I hear you speak is when you talk about how autistic people or people with disabilities are very much misunderstood. And I think you help people realize that, you know, that's not a good path to go down, that we have to try to understand. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I feel like for years, especially like when I was in high school and a little after that, like people and teachers and staff often referred to me as attention seeking or manipulative, but really there was so much more to it because, as you know, behavior serves a purpose in communication. Like you write about in Uniquely Human, um, when you went and observed the individual repeating a phrase that appeared to have no meaning to the situation, and you asked the adult, and they were able to tell you what it meant from a past experience.
Yes, and sometimes it's playing a little bit of detective work, right?
Yes.
What does that mean?
For example, I was on a meeting last or a few weeks ago, I think it was now. It's all blending together, COVID time. And I was getting overwhelmed and I said, "The sky is falling. The sky is falling." Which is interesting. I picked that phrase because I've never seen Chicken Little in my life. But for some reason, must know or have seen it associated with being overwhelmed. So that's what I chose.
Yes. Do you think the people understood how you
Yeah.
were feeling?
Yeah, because someone who was on the call immediately said, "I think we need to back off a little bit. I think she's overwhelmed."
Ah, okay. So in the terms that we like to talk about in Uniquely Human, that was a person who got it.
Yeah.
Do you find, Chloe, that you have a lot of people in your life who get it, or are you still looking for people all the time?
Now I have a lot of people who get it. My boss and the director of where I work is actually the mom to a son with autism who's just a little bit older than I am. And I have amazing therapists and family members who get it. My staff and I were at a meeting a few weeks ago, and I was starting to get a little overwhelmed. And even though I had my iPad and a pen and paper, she brought up her notes app on her phone and just kind of put it in my direction in case I wanted to use it. And eventually I started typing goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. And she said, "Okay, if you want to leave, we just have to say goodbye and we can leave." But sometimes I'll be contradictory of myself because I'll feel like I will want to leave, but I won't want to miss out. So therefore, I don't want to leave. So I'll keep like walking around or sitting back down, like, yes, I'm overwhelmed, but no, I don't want to leave.
That's really good that you are able to explain it not only to the people in the room, but also that you know this about yourself. What are some of the things that make you feel overwhelmed when you're at a meeting at work?
The fact that I haven't been there in almost 5 months.
The disruption in the routine of it?
Yeah, a lot of it right now is just going back and relearning and reintroducing to this whole new world we've got because this is not the normal I left the first week in March. And then
Right.
the normal was I did very well with the stay at home and we were really impressed. And then that normal changed. So there's just been so many changings of routine and changing of normal, but like I have went to a visual PEC schedule and I don't see it as a step backward, because if it's working, why fix it?
Chloe, that's one of the things that you help to teach so many people. And it's visuals, it's other forms of communication, of augmentative communication.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of your missions. Would you like to kind of share why you
Yeah.
feel that's so important?
So in summer 2011, so it's hard to believe, but we just hit 9 years. Um, I experienced a traumatic event, and with people who I thought understood and my family thought were going to understand, and they ended up not, and I ended up being just traumatized and misunderstood. And after that, I was really confused and lost and frustrated in so many feelings. And then I met people with autism, and um adults with autism who advocated and stuff, and they mentored me, and also my therapist and stuff. And I realized that I wanted to write a book, and I wanted to speak and advocate to teach people about what it's like from my perspective, to help bridge that gap and to help teach more knowledge. So people don't just say they understand, but they actually do. And I started by speaking to med students with pre-programmed messages on my iPad, pressing them one button at a time.
Oh, wow. So when you were younger, you used assistive communication devices?
No, I have only used AAC for 9 years now, because I am so verbal and so articulate that we would have never guessed. I would have even never personally guessed that AAC would be something that I would ever learn to know. But it was apparent after I was diagnosed with PTSD that there was, and probably to some even a little bit before that, that there was a lot more that I could write and express writtenly than I could verbally. But I think at the time we didn't know.
And based upon your experience, I think you've become a very outspoken advocate for speaking people being able to communicate in the way they feel most comfortable.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's a very powerful message.
Do you sometimes use the assistive communication technology when you're at work?
Not so much at work yet right now. Like yesterday when I was at a meeting, I chose pen and paper to communicate to my job coach.
Mm-hmm. I think anybody would benefit from multiple modes of communication in the workplace.
Yeah, I've also co-authored a book now on it's the My Interoception Workbook, a guide for teens, adolescents, and adults, with Kelly Mahler and another young adult with autism. And interoception is a sensory sense about how you feel your body, and that's another thing I'm really passionate about.
And would you like to share a little bit and kind of relate it to interoception? I know that you've had some medical issues that sometimes causes pain, and you had problems communicating that to your doctor, but you were so creative in finding ways to do that. I was amazed when you first shared that with me, that you said it was difficult to kind of isolate in your own body where you felt pain or discomfort. But if you had your body map or you had a visual, it was easier to communicate to others.
Yeah. For a long time, the words I had related to pain were head hurt, stomach hurt, throat hurt, call doctor, mom, look at it and fix it. Though that, and crying and screaming. That was pretty much it.
Well, that was a big help to have that avenue, that way to be able to communicate that.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I'd like to ask a question on a slightly different topic here. One of the things that's so exciting that I see going on is autistic people who are older, more experienced, mentoring younger autistic people.
Yeah.
And I know you had a very special person in your life who's also a good friend. And would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I've had many of them. And during COVID-19, I have 2 nights a week where we gather on Zoom, 2 different groups, and we just chat and stuff. And it really was amazing and still is, because they've taught me that I can speak about anything and that there's no judgment.
That sense of community is so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually first met you, Chloe, many years ago at one of our autism conferences. I had invited Dina Gassner.
Yeah, Dina Gassner.
And Dina spoke about you and how wonderful you were, and you were a teenager at the time.
Yeah.
So what does a person like Dina, what role has she played in your life?
A huge role. The first conference I ever met Dina at in person, transitioning out of the car into the conference was even a huge step. Now, years and years later, I sit on the ARC board of the United States.
Wow.
Along with Dina, which is something I would have never even imagined possible.
That's incredible.
And now you get to share the confidence that you're being filled up with. Now you have it to share with other people.
Yeah. And I love helping other people.
There have been so many changes that have happened with autistic people.
Yeah, because of COVID-19, Barry, it's changed everything.
That's right. Yeah, and I hope we get back to a new normal. But what do you hope for the future in terms of, let's say we get a vaccine and we get back to a new normal in maybe in a year or so, or less than that?
Well, I hope that my friend and I can go to the indoor jungle gym place we were supposed to go to with my staff on March 28th because we couldn't go there. And I hope that it will mean we can go to conferences in person again, and that we won't have to walk around on eggshells worried about COVID-19.
Yeah.
Yes. What are some of your favorite things about going to the conferences?
Meeting people. And next time I go to a conference, like I was supposed to go to a conference in Nebraska, and that was going to be my first time ever since the book I co-authored came out, actually autographing a book that I wrote, and that got canceled.
Oh, that's okay. It will be rescheduled, and I predict
that
you will have.
Well, that one went virtual, but they were interested in more.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chloe, you must be so proud of co-authoring a book. I mean, there are very few people of your age. And how old are you now? 25, 26?
27.
27, my goodness.
Almost 28.
I mean, I don't know many people who've co-authored a book who are in their mid-20s. That's incredible.
It's a workbook and a guide to teach teens, adolescents, and adults about interoception, because interoception has really changed and helped open up my life and created an amazing friendship with Kelly Muller, who's an occupational therapist in Pennsylvania. And we met at a conference.
Can you tell me a little bit about interoception?
Interoception is the 8th sensory sense, which teaches you and tells you when you're hungry, thirsty, tired, all these different sensations that most people just know.
So it's almost, it gives you that sense of self-awareness about what's happening. Okay.
It also can deal with emotions. So like I would go from like 1 to 100, or or I would have someone tell me, "We've given you all the tools, you just have to use them." Well, the first step to self-regulation really is not self-regulation, it's interoception. So we gave me the tools, but we were missing a step we didn't even know.
And Chloe, would you like to talk about some of those tools? I've been so impressed by seeing that you have so many things that help you to stay well regulated.
I have a weighted blanket. We've converted a small area in our basement to a sensory room. Recently, my waiver paid for a small squeeze machine steamroller, which was a nice COVID-19 delivery surprise. I have so many different sensory fidgets that it's not even sad anymore when I break one, because that happens frequently. And I'm even lucky to work at a place that has a sensory room on their day program side for their adults that I get to use when I need it.
You know, Chloe, for many years, some people in the field of autism, professionals, I mean, said, well, there's no such thing as sensory problems or sensory processing issues, that when a child covers his ears or drops to the ground or screams, that's just bad behavior.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that point of view?
Because we're not presuming competence. Instead, we're just assuming, we're really doing a lot of assuming that the individual has the words at the moment to tell us what's wrong, or in assuming that they cannot cover their ears and are doing the behavior by a choice.
And I think that's one of the most powerful messages that you get across to people. And that is not only, am I competent, but, you know, I have issues that you are misunderstanding, and you need to listen to me, or really to try to understand my experience.
Yeah. Another thing that really hits home for me and uniquely human is when you write about how being sick or not feeling well can be a huge change to individuals with autism. I despise sick. Not that anyone likes it, but a cough, to me, if you even mention I'm sick, I will tell you no sick, no sick, no sick, no sick. So then we come across COVID-19. Let's just say the social story amount that I have read now has been a lot, but they've seemed to help. But we've really had to teach, because like I'm scared to death of it. But then again, I even told my doctor, I'm like, you got to remember, I'd be scared of the common cold, because it's a change in routine.
That's right.
And you never know when exactly it's going to end. And I like predictability, not the unknown.
It is so true. I mean, the uncertainty, the not knowing where we're going from here, I think it's difficult for everybody, but I think especially for autistic people, it's a particularly tough area to deal with.
Yeah.
Well, I think we certainly want to thank you for all of your insights.
Thank you.
We have so much we could share, and your time has been so generously given to us.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh man, she's so great. So great. You have a gig with her coming up, right?
Yeah, we're going to be sharing a day, and that is for Parent Magazine in Detroit. And I have to double check on the date. We'll put it on the website for you, because it was rescheduled due to COVID. But we were both so excited when we heard that we were going to be sharing a presentation together. And let me just say one more thing about Chloe. And it's almost become a cliche that people say this so often, but everybody who meets Chloe loves Chloe, and for good reason. She's doing so much for the autism world and autism community right now, but she's just an enthusiastic, engaging person.
And by the way, no rational person, such as Chloe, would ever want to be a poster child for anything that I know of. But if I had to name someone whose personal story really engenders sort of autism, reframing autism, and so-called autistic behaviors, it's Chloe. And speaking of reframing, by the way, let's do that. So this is the first installment of a weekly, but not really because we publish every 2 weeks, I guess. But we're calling it the Weekly Reframe, where we'll offer a more nuanced, more person-centered perspective on classic autism themes. This was your idea, and I love it. So enough pontificating and stage setting. Let's get to it. Let me ask you this. What are we reframing this week? I don't have this in my production notes because while you and I were talking during the production meeting, I was drawing pictures of chickens going about their day in business attire. So I don't know what we're doing right now.
So our topic for reframing today in our inaugural reframing segment is the concept of stims, or self-stimulatory behaviors.
Good.
And let me just add, a piece of this reframing is about all of the changes, how we're looking through a different lens now, and in some cases, a diametrically opposed lens to how some of these things were thought of as before. For example, so-called stims and self-stimulatory behavior a number of years ago were thought of by professionals, the so-called experts, as autistic behaviors that needed to be extinguished, eradicated, and sometimes through punishment.
Yeah.
And as I've learned from some people on the spectrum, but as we know with the current autism revolution, that when people engage in repetitive motor movements, vocalizations, flapping hands, jumping up and down, rocking, self-directed vocalizing, those are just some examples of so-called self-stims, that very often it serves different purposes for people, and very often those purposes are actually helpful.
Helpful, like regulatory or just stabilizing? What?
Good for you, Dave. You're learning that vocabulary. Yes, regulatory.
I learned it from your book.
Yes, self-regulatory, meaning it could be grounding, it could be calming, it could help to shut out a lot of the busyness and craziness in the environment, which can be so dysregulating to some people.
And okay, I got you. So somebody in a state of dysregulation will say, you know, we're looking at behaviors that might be coming up in classrooms or at home or at the park or whatever. And the reason we wanted to take a look at this and reframe it is because it's got this, you know, I think if people don't understand the behavior, they're looking at it as possibly non-compliant, hyperactive kid, you know, flapping, rocking, just quote unquote being weird, right?
Yes. And in some cases, it's interpreted as, well, he does that just to try to get out of doing what we want him to do. And in some cases, it may make a 10, 12, 15-year-old young man or woman looking different than another 15-year-old might look. But we have to go back to, you know, a recurring theme in our discussions and in Uniquely Human, and that is getting to the why. Why is that being done? And of course, it's so important for us to acknowledge that we all stim. Everybody stims. Everybody's neurological system gives us strategies to stay well grounded, to deal with anxiety, to defer or keep away stimuli that are noxious, potentially harmful, and aversive to us. So we all have our little repertoires. And one of the things I need to say is that very often we're not fully aware or conscious of what we're doing, and other people will point it out to us.
But when you do it as a majority neurotypical guy, it can be seen as, yeah, I took that class with Dr. Prezant, and did you notice how he wiggles his knee every time the classroom gets quiet, or whatever the case may be? it's almost like this endearing quirk, right? But then you put the word autism or Asperger's on it, and it's like, all right, hey, your autism is flaring up. Why don't you settle down those legs there, you know?
One of the things we talk about in our educational model called the CERTS model, when we talk about emotional and physiological regulation, is what do we do to increase our arousal level if we're feeling too low, if we're feeling lethargic, we're feeling like, I didn't get enough sleep last night. And that might be the bouncing the legs. That might be, some people crack their knuckles.
Yeah.
Some people tap their hands. And on the other end of the continuum is what do we do to bring ourselves down when we're feeling agitated, when we're feeling anxious, when we have too much energy. So the so-called stimming behaviors help us to expend some of that energy. So in some cases, we're trying to increase our arousal level. In other cases, we're trying to decrease our high arousal level. And in some cases, it might be the same behavioral pattern that serves different functions.
That's so cool how the brain works. What are some of the stronger negative or more adverse reactions to an individual's stimming that you've observed, and how were you able to reframe it and say, actually, this is important?
Yeah. Before we say it's important, we have to say, does it appear to be effective? In other words, is it helping that child to kind of come down a few notches if he or she is too revved up? And what we mean by too revved up is they're not as available for learning and engaging with people in an activity that has those requirements. So I think we talk about, is it effective? But then we also need to talk about, is it socially desirable?
Yeah.
Because what some people, some neurotypicals might feel is not socially desirable. So let me give you an example. I once met a young man, I think he was 16 or 17 on the spectrum. He was strong, tall, lanky, about 6'2". And when he would get excited, he would get up on his toes and start jumping up and down.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, the issue there is for little old me, who's like 5'6", 5'7",
Yeah.
that's an imposing figure next to me jumping up and down. And if I don't know the young man, I might say, whoa, am I safe here?
If you're a police officer.
Exactly. Is he okay?
Yeah.
And by the way, that's a whole other thing that we need to talk about, is helping first responders to understand the behavior of people on the spectrum.
Right.
But in some cases, it does have to do with stimming behaviors that may be seen as unusual, and therefore this person is not safe. And so as a first responder, I need to react in a way that maybe is not that helpful.
That's right. So you've got this 6'2", long arms, long legs, acting out in this way. Would you say it was, quote unquote, working for him? And if not, is there some other way to introduce a stimming behavior that would be more effective and socially agreeable?
Well, here's where you need to bring in the expert voices. And what I mean by that is people who know this young man well. And in this case, I did observe that he would get up on his toes and jump up and down. And to me, it was clear he was experiencing extreme positive emotion, was very excited. And he would do that for about 10, 15 seconds and then kind of calm down and literally be more grounded on the ground. So that has to do with, does it appear to be effective? And we have to understand that in many cases, stims are coping strategies, such as a young child at circle time in kindergarten, rocking back and forth, vocalizing with his hands over his ears if there's too much talking going on that he doesn't understand. I think that's important to realize. But many autistic people also say stimming can be fun, that I do it because, I like making those noises. It feels good in my mouth.
Yep.
I give an example in Uniquely Human of one child who I was playing with, and he was picking up pieces of torn sponge. We did an art activity on the floor. And I said to him, that's a piece of sponge. And he looked at me, a 4-year-old, who was echolalic. He repeated speech. He looked at me and he said, that's a piece of sponge. The next day, we went back to that same room, and without any sponge being on the floor, he went, That's a piece of sponge, that's a piece of sponge, smiling and laughing.
Just having the time of his life.
And for him, it was a sensory party.
Yeah.
He was just loving the way it felt and sounded. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, some people might say, stop that. No silly talk. Stop that. Okay. Or if we want to teach him a language concept, we could say, oh, those words feel good. Sponge. Can we say sponge again? Maybe turn it into a little reciprocal game as he's doing it. So you're not judging him and saying, stop it. What you're saying is, hey, I think I could understand a little bit why you're enjoying those words in your mouth. So but the more dangerous question you asked a few minutes ago is, well, what about negative reactions? There's actually research from, I would say, primarily the 60s into the early 70s, where people would punish kids for flapping their hands, for jumping up and down. There was one study I'll never forget that they thought, okay, well, flapping is an autistic behavior. Let's put a kid in a room with nobody else in the room, and we have control of the lights, and we're going to kind of assume that the lights being on is positively reinforcing. And so the experiment was, every time the kid would flap his hands, they would turn off the lights.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when the kid would be still, they would turn the lights on again. Purely an attempt to extinguish the behavior without any attempt to understand, why is this child doing this? What about this child's neurology that leads to this pattern of behavior, and what function is it serving for the child? And now so many adults on the spectrum talk about the fact that when there were attempts to extinguish their self-regulatory stimming behaviors that made them even more anxious, and some people on the spectrum now say that was one source of trauma that they feel, that what their body was doing to try to help them cope in situations was literally either stripped away from them, or they were given very significant negative feedback that made them feel lousy about themselves.
Yep. No, I can vouch. What advice would you give to parents, educators, and clinical professionals when a parent or a teacher has a concern about what they're perceiving as either a disruptive or obnoxious behavior, but could actually be a self-regulatory stimming behavior?
Well, you gave us 3 different categories. And of course, in our approach, certainly informed by our CERT's educational model, is let's bring all those people together. If a behavioral pattern is of significant concern to one of those parties, and let's everybody share their expertise about about that child or that person. And what I mean by share their expertise, if each one of those individuals or parties spends time with that person in a different environment, they might be seeing different things and different reactions. And then ask that deep why question. And especially around regulatory behaviors, and in some cases, behaviors that may be communicative, we certainly want a speech language pathologist, a sensory trained occupational therapist involved. If there is a psychologist on the team who plays an important role, and of course, the voices of the parents are paramount as well. But let's talk about this. Go through that little sequence. Does it seem to be effective for him or her? Is it socially desirable? Is there something else, if it's not as effective or maybe not socially desirable or even harmful, and that clearly, would raise the ante about it being not socially desirable or helpful?
Right.
What else can we help this person do, which some people refer to as replacement strategies?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes changing the environment helps. So let me give you a quick example of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was consulting to a young man where his stim in class to keep him focused when listening to the teacher talk was tapping the table with a pencil. Okay.
Right.
And he did it loudly enough that people were saying, well, this is kind of distracting to other people, disruptive. We have to stop the behavior. And then the team met. They were having a progress report meeting anyway. And then it was the mom who said, hey, listen, can't you just put like a soft, spongy mouse pad on his desk so he could do the repetitive tapping, but it doesn't make noise?
Huh.
So there's an example of changing the environment, either to reduce the stress or to reduce the need to do that, or to make what was distractible not distractible.
See, the replacement strategies that you're describing, that's so important, because when you grow up, ideally you want to be somebody who can be employed and retain a job. And having some really big, we'll say disruptive, distracting behaviors makes it really hard to either get or keep that job. It makes it sometimes difficult to just be included in different social things that would help, improve your quality of life overall, whether that's a gaming club or just, a romantic relationship, whatever. It's in an ideal world, every individual, autistic or not, would be free to be exactly who they are and who they need to be, just to get through their day. But we know that the demands of the real world are such that I can't stand up and clap my hands 5 times really loudly. And if I work in an office setting, that's not going to last very long. The HR office is going to pull me in. And I have, by the way, worked in a corporate environment. I worked there for 20 years in different corporations, and nothing is less autism friendly than working in a corporate setting. But I think the awareness is twofold. It's be aware that this stimming behavior helps you and why and how it helps you. And also, is this going to present such a problem socially that in the end it has a net negative impact on your life? And if so, maybe there's a different strategy to help you cope or to help you regulate your energy.
And very often it's in schools, it's adults making those judgments. And if you ask the kids, very often the kids will say, no, that doesn't really bother me that much.
Wow.
So we have to come back to autistic people living in a neurotypical world. And what are the expectations? When can we say, the fact that he or she does that, it's not such a big deal. And am I putting this person under a microscope? And let me just finish this point by quoting a mother. I'll never forget this. It was a pattern of behavior that a young man engaged in. I think it was rocking and vocalizing. And the teacher says, well, we have to get him to stop that. But it seemed like the kids, it didn't bother other kids in the class too much. I believe this was a 12-year-old young man. And the mother wrote a note to the team saying, why is it that we put my autistic son under a microscope and things that he does are considered to be socially unacceptable, whereas if a neurotypical kid did it, it wouldn't be such a big deal? Mm-hmm. Why is it that my son has to behave, quote unquote, appropriately 95% of the time, when for most other kids, it's 75% of the time?
Oh, wow. You're so right. When I look around at whether it was elementary school, high school, middle school, the kids with an IEP were scrutinized, and captain of the football team could be a dick. And it was just fine because, he's just being a clown. It's like, well, what was I doing? I was just bouncing my leg trying to hear what the teacher was saying. He's not even paying attention to the teacher.
Yeah. And too often in the past, we've said, that neurotypical kid, obviously not using those terms, but it's allowable because he's the captain of the football team.
Yeah.
Because he's president of the United States.
Yes, exactly. Because he's a senator.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. We kind of stretch the boundaries of socially acceptable versus unacceptable behavior.
Yeah. And
the worst pattern that happens is if a kid has a disability, regardless of the disability label, then we begin to say, oh, well, that's the autism. And if we're going to cure this kid of his autism, he needs to stop that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've never really met a circumstance where a person with cerebral palsy who had some problems with oral motor control and swallowing saliva was punished for drooling.
You're exactly right. I never thought of it this way. And it's so funny. I've been living with this for 43 years and I never saw it through this. I've never been able to really do much to control the bouncing of my legs and then fidgeting with my hands. And as we've been talking, we're on a Zoom meeting, so you can only see part of the frame, but for a lot of the conversation, I've had my hands behind my back and I'm just driving my thumb on my right hand into the palm of my left hand.
Mm.
And it's helping me do real-time processing of your language, because conversation is not my strong suit, which is ironic because I host 2 podcasts. And to get through kind of real-time processing of a conversation, I have to fidget. I have to actively listen to what you're saying, understand how that ties into the overall point that you and I are talking about, and then give you some kind of sequential response that makes sense. And to pull all that off, I'll try to get a picture of that sometime, of what I look like when you're talking. It looks like I'm bound with shackles, behind my back.
Yes,
Like I'm about to be,
does.
looks like I'm about to be shoved into a police cruiser, but
You look like let's see if I can get this right. Hannibal Lecter.
hello, Clarice. I just looked down at the Zoom meeting. That's exactly what I looked like. Oh my gosh. Well,
I
all
wonder
right.
if he was self-regulating at that time.
Hey man, he's just a guy doing what he needs to do. Eating people. This has been so great. Barry, I think I want to do one thing really quick, because I know that our next episode, we're going to do a deep dive into enthusiasms, which is a great word, replacing things like special interest or obsession, which can have connotations to them that aren't always as positive. That'll be in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, please send us enthusiasms. What are you enthusiastic about? What is your child enthusiastic about? And get specific, because we want to share these things on the show in a weekly segment. And we know that you're out there being enthusiastic about something. We want to hear about it. All right. Well, there you have it. And on behalf of my esteemed co-host, Dr. Barry Prezant, I'm going to end this in a very Asperger's fashion, which is to say, abruptly. Enjoy this amazing music from Matt Savage, and we look forward to seeing you again in a couple weeks.
All right, thank you.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.